What if I told you that 75% of today's workforce is either fully remote or hybrid, but most leaders are still trying to manage culture like it's 1995? Hey everyone, welcome back to the Future of Work with AI. I'm Ryan Kay, and today we're diving deep into something that's keeping HR leaders up at night. How do you actually build a thriving culture when your team is scattered across living rooms, guest bedrooms, and coffee shops, all connected by nothing more than Wi-Fi signals? I'm joined by Dr. Liz Scott, a change management expert who just wrapped up speaking at National SHRM, and she's bringing some fascinating insights about what she calls culture carriers, the idea that every single employee has become a walking, talking embodiment of your company culture. We're going to unpack why proximity doesn't equal connection, dive into the psychology of social capital in the workplace, and here's the kicker. We'll explore why AI implementation isn't really a technology problem at all, but actually one of the biggest change management challenges organizations have ever faced. Trust me, if you're struggling with hybrid team dynamics, employee engagement, or wondering how to lead people you can't see every day, this conversation is going to give you some serious light bulb moments. Let's dive in. Yeah. So let's roll it right into this. So tell me the 30-second backstory of you're speaking at SHRM, you're speaking on change management clearly, or some variation of that, and culture and Ripple and all that stuff. How did you get into speaking at SHRM? Is this, yeah.
So it came from honestly just decades of doing consulting work and working with clients. And then COVID happened and everybody freaked out and everyone was trying to figure out what they were doing. And now you fast forward 5 years past COVID and hybrid is not going away. It's a thing that people have to deal with. And in the HR space and just in leadership in general, people and what I'm seeing with clients is that they're realizing that it's not going away. There's more of it. I think the stats come back right now that there's 53% of people that work in some sort of a hybrid environment, and then 14% that are totally remote. That's 75% of the workforce. And we're just
Hmm.
continuing to move in that direction. And there's a whole bunch of, interesting information around that. But you start thinking about how do you create culture when people are not in the same space. They're hanging out, in their living rooms, in their guest bedrooms, or wherever their office has been set up. And so that's really what the impetus for this presentation was how do we create culture when we have to understand that each individual person is now a culture carrier and they're connected through Wi-Fi signals. They're not connected. There's no general office meeting. There's no water cooler conversation. And so how do we do that? How do we build that sense of connectivity? And so that's really where the presentation came from. I chatted with a bunch of clients, got some of their best practices around what they were doing, and then thought that others in the HR space might be interested in learning some of those tips and techniques.
Yeah. And I think, COVID was like a forcing mechanism. We were, man, I set up my company, we were hybrid for the last 2 decades. And clearly us tech people kind of start in that realm. But I was 80% working mom, lots of part-timers, people are all over the place, everybody's got a laptop and an iPhone, and they're at a soccer game or picking up carpool, waiting for their kids, doing a demo. like um but it was definitely difficult, but also was built into, because I don't think it's just a question of how do you maintain your culture. I think it's a leadership question. When COVID hit, it was almost like a forcing function of you have to figure out how to lead these people. And when it was over, a lot of those people that thought this is temporary, we don't need to evolve our leadership, this is just a band-aid, immediately clap back to great, get him back in the office because I didn't like it. But that wasn't because the employees weren't doing things great. It was hey, you need a culture that deals with that stuff. You need leaders that know how to lead people when they're not all in the same space. So
Yeah.
how do you for those, because you probably have a difference between cultures that start remote and cultures that start hybrid, and those that are kind of being forced or choosing, I guess, to evolve that. How are those different? Because I'm sure there's some learning from that, right?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. And then there's some industries that, although they might have gone remote temporarily during COVID, like the hospitality industry, you can't do that remotely. You've got to be in person for that type of work, you know? I was actually just talking to a client yesterday who's in the hospitality space, and they were saying how what they experienced was during COVID, there was a bit of a lax of cultural values. It was a, we're all in this together, we're all dealing with it. And there's this great expression, it's not mine, it comes from a book called School Culture Rewired. And it says that the culture that a leader accepts, so the worst behavior that you're willing to accept becomes the baseline for what culture is in your organization. And we don't necessarily think about that, you know, like we put all these great values up on walls and we talk about things like integrity and we talk about you know, whatever it is that we're pushing out into the world. But when you allow this bad behavior to happen, that's really the bar that you're setting. And so this client was saying, you know, we've been back, COVID was like a momentary blip, but we allowed all this really bad behavior to happen. And now you fast forward and we've got these values like, you know, we want to make sure that people have a spirit of generosity, for example. That's one of their values. And they were talking about how there's horrible gossiping that's happening behind the scenes and everyone's talking about everybody else. That's not coming from a spirit of generosity and kindness, right? And so I think that some of it is how you work, but then a lot of it is the messaging that leaders put out into the world, but also how employees interact with other employees.
Yeah, and I think even yeah, and there's like clearly like lots of bad behavior to go around. I think a lot of leaders are like don't exactly set the bar
Right.
because
Yeah.
I think you have the like look, if we're going to allow and what's interesting about that is like your great employees will hold the high bar until they give up and they're just like all right like this behavior is rewarded by allowing it and therefore why do I keep doing it at this high bar and generally it's not that they like degrade the way they show up they probably end up if it's bad enough just leaving going and finding somewhere else but I think on the flip side you have leaders that don't exactly like exp- show up as the example of their values probably
Yeah.
be a good one. And hybrid and that type of stuff is an interesting one because I have lots of employees that I've heard complain. They're like, so we have to come to the office every day, but not our leaders. They get to work hybrid. That doesn't make any sense. Why? How exactly does that work? Especially like you've got C-level execs living all over the country and they come and go in and out of the office and you know it's kind of fit into this like well I have to travel and I've got to bounce around and yet you force your employees to be there and they're like well, that doesn't exactly work. And so, yeah, I think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it just depends on the type of work that you do too. I mean, we've done some work in the construction space, for example, and it's true that if you are in a senior leadership position, you probably can work from home. But when you're a project manager or the on-site engineer, you can't do that from your house. You've got to be on project site. You've got to be there and seeing what's happening. And so that's where I think these questions of sort of equity come in, and culture is often built off of that too. It's not just a question of do I have to be in the office or do you have to be in the office? But how do we do this in a way that's fair for everybody? And, you know, if you look at the research, for example, being in the office 5 days a week does not actually promote any sort of sense of community well-being, or it doesn't improve the productivity. The magic number is actually 3. So 3 days in
Mhm.
the office is that tipping point between I get what I need in person, but then I also have time to be thoughtful and productive at home. But not all industries allow for that.
Right. And even those that do don't get the math of that.
Right.
And you talk to their employees, and their employees clearly wouldn't say this out loud. But I literally had a tech worker here at my house on the weekend, and she's like, "Oh, I'm so much less effective at work. Like everybody's talking and chatting." She's like, "When I work at home, I knock all my work out and get it done, but I'm not allowed to work at home. I have to be in the office, so I get less done." Clearly, she would never say that out loud to a leader or boss or anybody like that. But when you get them actually talking about it, they're like, yeah, this is not effective for head down work,
Right.
for team meetings and for launching a new project and brainstorming. Oh, it's great to be with the team. So how does a company kind of like thoughtfully map that out? Because I think it's more than just like, hey, we got together and came up with our 5 values, and here's how it's going to work, and we're going to put them on the wall. But how do you actually thoughtfully map out, like, this is what our culture is, and more importantly, the like rituals and the things that we're going to do to kind of drive it?
That's a great question. So I think that values are super important, but values are words on walls. They don't really mean anything, right? So what's important is what's the behavior behind that value. So it goes back to the example I gave earlier. If our value is integrity, then one of the behaviors might be not be CCing people on emails or not triangulating and talking about somebody behind their back, right? And so I think it's not just the value, but it's having the conversation about what does that value look like as a behavior in action? And then how do we hold one another accountable to make sure that those values are being lived? And that's a longer conversation. That's not a one-time team building, that's living and breathing your values. I know that here at Brighter Strategies, for example, we've had a lot of those conversations, and we actually take our values and the behaviors and we put them on the top of every meeting agenda. And we review them
Mhm.
at the beginning of every meeting. Like, here are the values, here are the behaviors. And there are plenty of times in meetings where somebody will reference back and they'll say, hold on, I don't think that this conversation that we're having aligns with this value, and I want to go back and revisit the value. And that's when you know that people are actually having these conversations and that it's meaningful. And whether you're in an office or whether you're doing that on Zoom, it's the behavior that makes sense, that really quantifies the culture, if that makes sense, right? It's not just having words on papers or cool posters on your wall.
Oh, 100%. And I think that, like, introducing it up front, especially because you assume, hey, if it's at the top of our agenda, and if we talk about it, or one of them, or whatever the case may be, and therefore the leader, the person conducting the meeting, is introducing and creating the stage. It's like, hey, I introduced this, therefore, like, that gives a level. It doesn't mean it's like absolute, but it gives a level of permission to be like, hey, at the beginning of this meeting, we talked about this, and clearly this isn't that.
Well, and
That
it's
I,
about
yeah,
building it into your systems, right?
yeah,
Like, I was talking to a client the other day and they've got great values. They're doing amazing work. They cannot get a really good new hire in. People are lasting like 90 days and then they end up moving on. And so I was having a conversation with their HR team, and it turns out that they hadn't taken the values work and translated that into their hiring process. And so something as simple as, like, you have these values and behaviors. What about asking a behavior-based interview question around, hey Liz, tell me about a time where X, where you did this, you experienced this. And interestingly, it's like this light bulb went off and she was like, oh, we've never connected the two. So it's not
right.
just current employees, right? But it's the types of questions you ask, it's your onboarding process. All of these values and cultural norms have to be built into all of your systems, and everything's got to be connected, and then it has to be communicated. What's that stat that, like, people don't hear things unless you tell them the same thing? Like, it's like 5 or 7 times or something like that, right?
Right.
So it's
Yeah.
that constant drumbeat. Like, here's what's important to us. Here's how we want you to behave. Here's what that looks like, and here's how we reinforce it. And that's got
Yeah,
to happen
100%.
on a
And
basis.
I think that leaders are like, hey, we're not, this isn't kindergarten, this isn't elementary school, and so yada yada yada. But it is like, look, if this stuff is important, you're 100% right. Like, hey, you need to say this a bunch of times, but more importantly, your team, whether consciously or subconsciously, takes cues from what is being talked about. And what's talked about and what's measured is important. And if you don't talk about it, or suddenly it just is not talked about anymore, then it's a fad. Oh, I guess it doesn't matter anymore. And if it isn't measured, not like, again, carrots and sticks, measurement also is carrots of like, oh, we're reinforcing good behavior. We're highlighting it. We're saying, I think the average leader has zero clue how valuable and cheap, like, good job, thank you, like for us, employee referrals is a good example. Everybody's got an employee referral program and everybody believes they're awesome and yada yada yada. But if you actually unpack employee referrals, um, you will end up with like, yeah, well, we doubled the payout, and because we weren't getting enough, and we saw a bump, and then we saw a decline, and now we're super mad because we're paying twice as much but getting the same quantity of referrals. And almost nobody sits and goes, wait a second, maybe the bump wasn't the money. Maybe it was because we talked about it when we made the change. And then we reverted back to not talking about it. and it reverted back to the same level. And so, like for us at Applicant Pro, I think when I left, we were turning away like 20 referrals per hire or something like that. Um, and it was because it got talked about similar to your values thing in every single meeting. Like every meeting we talked about employee referrals, and every company meeting where new employees were introduced. Like I would full stop a meeting and be like, wait a second. So you just introduced Sally. That's awesome. Where'd she come from? Well, she came from Indeed. Okay, cool. But if she came from somebody else, oh, Jessica referred her. Awesome. Hey, Jessica, thank you for referring Sally. Sally, how do you know Jessica? Is this a BFF type referral or a weak connection? Oh, Jessica just happened to share this inside of some Facebook group, and that's how I applied. Oh, cool. And so we would force that drumbeat over and over and over again. And so the team knew, and it was like $250. It wasn't for the money. And we had leaderboards on referrals, and we had contests that we'd pay out like $50 based off who referred the most applicants, not the hires.
Mhm.
But that drumbeat set the tone that everybody knew, oh, this matters to the leadership team because they bring it up every single meeting. It just, there was no question. But if that had died down, like most companies where it's like, oh, well, we don't really talk about it anymore, then it gives this weird, like, unconscious signal of like, well, I guess that's over.
Yeah, I
And
think you're right. I mean, what gets measured gets done, right? That's where people focus their energy. And I think to one of your other points, money's important, clearly. We all have to pay bills, we all need a roof over our head. But once you've negotiated your salary and you're comfortable with it and you took the job, it's not the salary that keeps you there necessarily, right? It's the relationships, it's the sense of connection, it's a sense of feeling like you have a sense of belonging, that you're a part of something bigger. And a little off topic, but I think it's interesting. I just read a study the other day that one of the biggest challenges that we're having in the workplace, and I don't know if it's necessarily because of being hybrid or if it's just the way that we're connected, but it's about loneliness and disconnection. And when they asked people, what is it that makes you leave your job? It's feeling isolated from their team. It's feeling like they don't have a place for professional development. There's no ongoing learning. It's feeling like they can't collaborate with others, that they have really weak cultural connections. None of those concerns are I'm not making enough or I'm not getting the right referral benefit that I thought I was going to get. Money is clearly important, but it's all of these intangible pieces that I think really connect people to the organization.
oh, 100%. And I think the knee jerk for some companies is to go, well, yeah, that's because they're not in the office as much anymore, or whatever. And in actuality, it's like, that wasn't what they said.
Right.
Right? That wasn't what they said. Like for us, we'll do, I think right now we do every other month, 1 week. So we're full remote. But every
Mhm.
other month for 1 week, we come together and do like kind of like a jam session. We'll bring everybody together. We'll work on projects. We'll all go to Mexico because our programmers are in Mexico, or we'll bring them all here and hang out in a big house and work together. Right. And it solves for the lack of interactions on a daily basis. And we may not get a lot of like stuff done that we normally do. In fact, we kind of clear out a lot of that normal stuff so that we're working on something fun and working on something cool and working on something we've been putting off and like, but most of it is like deep connection time. We cook together and we eat together and we hang out together and we play pickleball and like whatever it is.
That sounds
But
awesome.
it's,
Can I come?
yeah, it solves for a lot of that distance of like amplifying these relationships together and like making sure people feel connected in the meantime and have a sense of like, oh, I know this person not just at work.
Yeah.
I know what they like, I know what they care about, I know what their passions are, I know those kind of things that like wouldn't normally get.
We do something really similar here at Brighter Strategies. We're a social impact focused
Mhm.
consulting firm. And so once a quarter, we pick a cause that aligns with the social impact work that we do. And we fly people in and we do a volunteer day. And we open it up to our contractors, to our staff, to our W 2 employees. And it's just an opportunity to roll up your sleeves, jump in, get some work done. There's always a fun happy hour, an event that happens afterwards. And then we tack on our strategy, our quarterly strategy session to that. So it ends up being a couple day event where we get to really hang out with folks and do meaningful, important work, but not actually work, if that makes sense. And it's fun, but it does create that sense of connectivity. And I think it helps with that sense of isolation, which, by the way, can happen if you're in an office. I mean, you can sit in an office and do nothing but Teams meetings and Slack people all day long. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're connecting with folks.
Yeah, I think I know that you talk something about proximity, but proximity is like the starting point. Like if it was just, hey, if I have proximity to other people, I won't be lonely, then going to Starbucks would solve the problem.
Right.
Like just being around humans doesn't make you feel connected. It is a starting point. It can potentially enable or facilitate it, but it doesn't cause it, especially if you've got introverts and you've got new employees who don't fit in and you've got like, whatever the case may be, everybody's got it. Even on the new hire, going back to your 90-day thing of like that was a big thing for us. I think I went to a National SHRM event where Patrick Lencioni spoke about his ideal team player and he had his like humble, hungry, smart, kind of three core values. But the biggest thing we came away with was he had an interview guide for behavioral questions on those three values. And we were like, awesome, we're going to plug this in. We will start interviewing everybody after they've gone through, our normal cognitive behavioral assessment and our computer tests and whatever. Like this was our third leg of like, we need to know like how they fit, especially because we were hiring people that hadn't done the job before. Like moms returning to the workforce, coming into support, knowing that they were going to become SaaS salespeople or marketing people or product people or whatever the case may be. We were like, hey, was as or more important than their resume. Do they fit? Because inherently, I believe people can learn. And so yeah, it was a huge deal. But I think the proximity thing. I know I have groups of moms that play bunco together, and so they get together. The sales team gets together not because of us, they just do it. And I think this might be a good intro into that, like your culture carrier concept. Like, I didn't say, hey, you guys should get together and do bunco or like, those things. They just decided
Yeah.
to do it, right?
So what I've found, just talking with different clients and looking at the research, is that there is something about physical proximity, right? But to your point, you can just be as lonely at a Starbucks as you can sitting in a big office, right? So it's less about simply being near people, but it's about having social capital with those people. It's building relationships with those people. And so the thing we always talk about is in the social capital space, there are three big things. One is trust, the second is reciprocity, and the third is emotional support. And so if you think about like, if my cell phone rings at 2 in the morning, there are some people that I'm totally going to answer the phone for, right? Without question. There's some people I'm going to let it go to voicemail, but then I'll check the voicemail just to kind of see like what's up. And then there's other people where I'm going to hit decline. And,
Mhm.
you know, and then as you think about those different relationships, that really has to do with how much social capital and how much trust I have with each of those individuals. It's sort of like a piggy bank, Steve
Right.
Covey talks about the speed of trust and how we all have this emotional bank account. We also have a social capital bank account. And the more I trust you and the more I engage with you in ways that you follow through, and there's a sense of reciprocity that if I do something for you, you're going to do something for me. I mean, you and I just met, so it's tentative. It's kind of a weak connection. Like we're putting our best foot forward. We think the other person is a decent human being, but am I going to drive 6 hours to help you? Probably not. Are you going to drive?
Right.
Probably not. But if the relationship continues and you start seeing that person continues to show up for you, then yeah, you're totally going to jump in your car and drive 6 hours to help that person, or whatever the context might be. And so that's when I think you start talking about culture and connectivity. And those moms that are getting together and hanging out and playing a game, it's because they have high levels of social capital with each other. They trust one another, they feel like they would support each other, and they're creating emotional connections and bonds because they truly like each other. It's like when
Mhm.
you leave an office, you resign from some employer, and there are still people that you choose to hang out with because you kind of like them. I've got plenty of people like that in my life that I used to work at this place and that's where I know that person, or I worked over here and that's where I know that person. And that's how we build our network. It's how we connect with folks.
Yeah, and I think as leaders, you should be looking for that same thing. And I think that's always the hard part. Like I have ex-employees that I still mentor. So they'll hit me up and be like, hey, I'm working on this project. Can you help me understand why my boss thinks X, Y, and Z? How would you approach it? And that one's like the true, I think, some of the best tests of a leader, how they treat employees that leave them. Not that they fire, like that's a totally different test, but employees that leave them when they're like, okay, this is going to be painful for us. We're going to have to solve for this gap, but I'm excited for them. And like, therefore, they feel like I left the door open to ask questions. Because we would get a lot of ex-employee referrals
Yeah.
that were coming back from that. That's like, oh, if you're starting out, you should go back and talk to Ryan. That's a great place to work, blah, 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 blah. And so I
That's
think
what you
like,
want, right? You want this
oh,
resource of people out in the world who say, you know, I worked there, they built my skill sets, they helped grow me, they helped launch me, and I'm super excited about them, and I would refer them to somebody else.
Oh, 100%. Like, if you're a leader and you want to measure legacy, you should be measuring it by, like, oh my gosh, I have a programmer who works at Zapier. Oh my gosh, I have an ex-programmer that works at this company. Oh, look at these people. It actually like those things of where you spread outside, especially if you have a great culture, having that spread outside of it and going, yeah, people, we're not a family, we're a team. Therefore, sometimes you're trading players and players move to wherever they go. And like some people are with us for a long time, and some people are on a tour of duty for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or however long they're with us. Clearly, we want to keep them as long as possible, but not like we don't want them to stay out of like, even if they love our culture, I don't want them to stay at their own detriment because they could have found a better opportunity working on, something that excites them more.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go build a new business model just because they're not excited by, what we're building, right?
Yeah, I'll definitely say, I mean, as a consulting firm here at Brighter Strategies, we've had employees who have moved on and then turned around and brought us into their new company because now they're, you know, they've moved from being a consultant in the HR space to now they're in-house. They decide they need some help and they're like, oh, I used to work for this firm that might actually be a great fit. That to me is the best type of referral possible because that person knows all the ins and outs, not just the quality of the work, but how the work gets done. And the fact that they're willing to put themselves in the line for a previous employer is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's where like organizations clearly like, employees need to show up and they can make or break like a culture, but at the end of the day, like it flows from the top down a little bit on like setting the tone and setting like the clarity and transparency and accountability and setting great examples and all those kinds of things. But I do think like the reciprocity and the social bank account and those things, you have to find a fine balance between individual, like me and an employee, and the greater team of
Mhm.
like, hey, I'm making investments in these bank accounts, and some of them are not going to work out, and some of them are going to leave. And it doesn't stop me from making investments in the greater culture just because I got burned this one time. Now, suddenly, I'm like, well, if the employees show up and earn it, I will give them this respect. Like I think for a lot of leaders that is the excuse for why they get a little bit like downside on this is like yeah but this one time we did that and we got burned. These,
For really good, strong leaders, though, I mean, I agree with you. Culture does start at the top and it does, there's a trickle down effect. But if you're really building people, you're helping employees connect with each other and you're sort of moving out of the way. And,
mhm.
you know, and that's where things like self-organized teams or, you know, self-organized work groups, that's where things like that can be so powerful because they have a groundswell. They've got a bottom to top sort of approach to them. And people are more invested when they can see their fingerprints on something. You know, at the end of the day, people want to be seen and they want to be heard.
So how do leaders switch over to that kind of mode?
I think you got to step out of the way. It takes a little bit of humility and a willingness to know that things aren't going to happen exactly the way you want them to happen. You know, I mean, that's anytime I do coaching with leaders around delegation, the thing I always hear back is, well, they're not going to do it the way I want it done. Well, yeah, that's why you're handing it to somebody else. It's not going to get done the way you want it to be done. But is an 80% solution or a 75% solution or a 95% solution, is that good enough? And I
Hmm.
think if we can learn to move out of the way and let other people thrive, let other people make mistakes, let other people learn. That's what mentoring is all about. I wouldn't be where I am if people hadn't mentored me. And I
Right.
think, that's what we do. We turn around and we offer guidance and support, and then we move out of the way so that people can be successful.
But that is a skill that most people, yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of managers who are doers
Mhm.
believe they were promoted because they're so great at doing. And that mindset has to shift to I have to be great at getting people to be able to do things, not me doing it anymore. And that's a very different skill than the doing. Like teaching somebody how to do something and giving them the ability to go do it and finding the balance of, I think it's the 5 minute manager and the monkey calls it insurance, figuring out what the insurance is on this. Like, is it you must clear it before you even start? Is it like show me before you send it? Is it like show me afterwards? Is it hey, there's a scorecard, like we can see when it's going off the rails? Or like let me teach you the framework, you can freestyle within here, but we know where the boundaries are. I think a lot of leaders just struggle because that's not the skill that got them into leadership.
And there's so much research around that, right? Like the difference between a manager versus a leader. And you're right, a lot of people are technically proficient, and that's why they get promoted. And I've heard plenty of managers, I'll say, you should spend at least an hour a week at minimum with each of your direct reports. And people will say, well, I've got 10 direct reports. I can't spend 10 hours a week talking to folks. I have work I need to get done. No, that is your work. Your work is
100%.
talking to those people every day. And I'm being generous by saying it's 1 hour a week. It should be like an hour a day. What are you
Hmm.
working on? How can I help you? What obstacles can I move out of your way? And some of
Yeah,
that,
the one-on-one, right, is the
yeah.
most opted out of session. Like group meetings, if you were like, oh, we have a leadership meeting, they'd all be there because we got to be there. We got to make decisions, right? But yeah, those one-on-ones of like, well, that's why, at least on our side, it's usually like 7 to 10. Can't have more than 7 to 10 direct reports unless they all do exactly the same job. But even then, it's because you're like, that way, 10 hours is like a day and a half, and you got 5 days this week. That's plenty of time for you to do your one-on-ones for
Yeah, I
sure.
think those are important. And what's interesting to me, though, is sometimes we run into cultures where those one-on-ones are optional, and it's not the manager who's opting out, it's the employee. And so they're
Hmm.
saying, like, I don't need to meet with you. I've got this covered. And at some level, I think maybe people think that they're doing their manager a favor by not connecting with them or freeing you up from this hour. But
Hmm.
realistically, if you're not connecting, you're not sharing your ideas, there's just, to me, there's more of a detrimental component to that. And I always find that to be an interesting cultural component.
So let's just take a minute. Do you have like a one-on-one framework? Like what's included in that one-on-one?
I like to think about it in three steps. One is what excites you? What are you working on? Two is what can I move out of the way for you? What barriers are in place that I can help? And then the third is what feedback do you have for me? How can I be better at doing what I'm doing? And I think that as you move through those three elements, you end up with a really rich conversation.
What's interesting is if you talk to the average manager, the one-on-one they fill into is tell me where you're at on these things. Why aren't these things done yet?
Yeah.
Which really wasn't included in what you talked about, other than the where am I stuck? Like I'm stuck about X. I don't have access to Y. I don't have the right tool for C, like those types of things. And so, yeah, it's funny that it becomes a reporting session.
Well, I was just going to say it's a meeting then and not a conversation. And that's the
Hmm.
problem with meetings in general, right? If we're all going to sit around a table or a Zoom room and we're all going to like, you're going to tell me what you're doing in your department, and the next person's going to tell me what they're doing. I could have read that update on Slack or on an email. I don't need to actually be sitting here to listen to that. That's just lazy meeting management.
Right.
And so, the purpose of getting together is to discuss, is to have a conversation. So, in that one on one, if I want to know where you are with projects, I'm assuming that most companies, you've got a project list or a project management system or a Gantt chart somewhere, or you're using Monday.com or something. I can log into that and see where you are. If I'm going to actually spend time and spend an hour with you, I don't need an update. I need a conversation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, start the meeting at 5 minutes after the hour and read that the first 5 minutes and then start your meeting.
Yeah,
At
for
least you
sure.
saw it. You came prepared, right? So I got to pivot us to AI because I believe that the next 3 to 5 years are going to be wildly different than they were before. And for more psychological and organizational reasons than what language model's the fastest or best or whether it can pass a test. So I would love to hear kind of like what you're seeing, but my fundamental concept right now is like AI implementation and execution work for the most part is not a technology problem. Like it's a people and leadership problem. This is if you're a small startup and you got 3 people and you're using ChatGPT, like that's a personal decision and it's a personal skill set. But if you have a team of 20 or 50 or heaven forbid 500, it's not a lack of technology. For the most part, like the challenge right now is like that's a big change. Like it's a rethink of the entire way we think about different processes and it's a leveling from a like we all became equally stupid about this new technology. Like your boss doesn't your boss might know how to do the job better than you, but doesn't know how to use AI better than you and definitely doesn't know how to use AI in the job better than you. So where am I going to go for guidance? Is that kind of similar to what you're seeing?
So here are my thoughts. I mean, I use AI every day, right?
Mhm.
It's a tool. It's not a replacement for human relationships. And so I think, can you use AI to support culture, for example? Absolutely. I mean, there are AI tools out there that are ethically designed that have a lot of different emotional intelligence components to them. Sure, but it's something that is a tool to help an HR team or help a manager. It's not something that's going to replace the HR team or replace the manager. I think over the next couple of years, what I'm seeing is that conversations around belonging, conversations around inclusion, around relational health, how people work together, those are going to continue to be really important. And we can use AI as a tool to create connection, but it's not going to solve something. And so the example that I always give is here at Brighter Strategies, and I know some of our clients use it as well. We are a Slack based company. So everything happens on Slack. It's like 90% of our
Mhm.
communication is on Slack. And it's awesome, right? There's a lot of really great automated and workflow components to it. And recently, well, I guess it's been a couple years now, but we downloaded this app to Slack called Donut, and it connects people, 2 random people in the organization, puts a 30-minute calendar on your books, and then gives you some interesting facts about the other person. Like Liz really likes Indian food, or Liz likes to travel, or this is the last book Liz read. And so, creates this connection. So it's a tool that's creating
Right.
culture, but it's not actually making the culture. It's just creating a way for me to connect with somebody in a different department that maybe I don't talk to all the time. And so I think things like that, that's a great integration of AI into a culture plan, but does it necessarily solve for culture? No, it's not a replacement, but it's a great modification and something to help facilitate a discussion or a conversation that wouldn't have happened if I had to reach out to somebody in a random department who I don't normally talk to and schedule 30 minutes and then find out what their favorite cuisine is so that I could have an impromptu conversation with them. It takes all that legwork out for me.
Right. Yeah. And I like to always tell people it's like AI is an amplifier. It's not the solution.
Oh,
And
100%.
and it's not the strategy. So
Yeah.
like if my strategy is, hey, I want our employees to randomly connect with each other, then AI can amplify that and hopefully or potentially make it a drumbeat so we don't forget about it. But just saying, oh, we got AI, it fixes our culture implies that it's the solution. And the AI can be a lot of things. It needs to be trained and it needs to be set up and structured the right way and given guardrails and all those. It's like bringing an employee in and being like, hey, now that Joe's here, everything's going to be better. He's just going wild and doing whatever he feels like. And we gave him no training, no backstory, no context. We didn't point him in a general direction. We just said, hey, Joe, you're over sales. Go solve this problem. By the way, like, we didn't tell you where the minefield's at. And I think that I think I go back to the loneliness and the disconnection in that. Your employees, whether you like it or not, are hearing massive, massive uncertainty coming at them from
Especially
every,
right now.
oh man, every AI company hasn't figured out that they are telling their core users that they won't be necessary and then wondering why they're not adopting. Like just every other day. Yeah.
That's a culture, it's a messaging problem, right? Like we use AI all the time. There are some great AI softwares right now that do analytics. They do qualitative coding as an example, right? Well, if you go back historically, we had somebody who was right out of college who was doing a lot of qualitative coding, putting things into deduce, and manually coding a lot of that work. Well, now you've got AI systems that can take over some of that. That doesn't mean that that person's job goes away. They still have to have the human component. They still have to go through and read it, make sure that the codes make sense and that the AI is not hallucinating and that it makes sense from a humanistic context perspective. But it also frees that person up to upskill and to learn new tools and be able to engage in other types of work that they might find a lot more interesting than coding hundreds of documents.
Right.
So, it's a tool. It's simply a tool. It's like when I was in college, and I was doing qualitative coding, we didn't even have deduce. We were like literally printing out sheets of paper and then taking different color highlighters and highlighting different elements. And then you move forward into something like deduce, which is awesome, but it didn't exist 20 years
Hmm.
ago. And whatever we're using now, it's not going to exist in 20 years. The tool and the technology is going to continue to change. People still have to be the one driving it.
Yeah, I just don't think that from what we see, leaders haven't figured out how to, like for my clients, we like redo and reset like an AI culture and set of values and set this vision for like, here's everybody, here's how we see implementing this. We don't know what we don't know. So we can't create this hard set policy because it's changing and evolving. So instead we've got a program, and so let's cast a vision. And here's how it, and you could take your current core values, be like, here's how this connects with our core values. Here's how our implementation in the workforce is going to connect with it. And here's how we're going to cross departmentally and cross teams start to build, because I think there's a lot of potential to actually build some of that belonging by bringing those teams together and being like, hey, we're all using Claude. We all have a common way that we're using Claude, a common set of like puzzle pieces. Now
Mhm.
let's show and tell. Like, somebody show us what you did this week with it. Awesome. Like, how did you do that? Cool. Like, who has a question for this person? Because for a lot of us, this AI is happening like it's like a free for all happening in individual accounts that nobody can see. And some organizations, they're like, we shut it down. And you're like, yeah, you can't stop an employee from using AI. Like, this idea that you can shut it down, like, that's not going to happen. It's like telling them they can't use social media at work. It happens anyway, right? Like, and you have the others that are like, free for all, we want you to solve it. But the collaboration, especially cross departmental, if that's your goal, is to create the sense of belonging, dude, AI is in a phenomenal spot to be like, show us how you used it, because most likely writing an email is cross departmental. Most likely analyzing a document and then doing something with it is most likely something we do in accounting and HR and sales. Most likely, some of these key like AI skill sets cross the organization.
I
So it's
think
a,
it needs
oh,
some
good.
guardrails, though. I do think, I mean, I hear you, and I think that it creates efficiencies and it allows people to collaborate. But I also think having some real conversations around, like the example I gave, if you're doing qualitative coding, um, you have to scrub all that. You've got to make sure that you've taken out names and contextual information that might be identifying, and you can't just dump things in. So I think as a company, that's part of that cross collaboration too, is talking about what tools are we using, how are we using them, and what ethical parameters are we putting in place to make sure that we're protecting our proprietary interests, but also that of our clients, as an example.
Oh,
And
100%.
got to
That's why
keep
you shouldn't be
improvement on
using,
that.
yeah, 100%. That's why they shouldn't be using free or even plus ChatGPT. They should be
Yeah. Oh
in
yeah,
Teams accounts.
sure.
But again, this idea of like either IT's got it or we'll just put our head in the sand and just don't talk about it. 100% adult conversation time. Here's the don'ts, here's the do's, here's the gray area, and here's our drumbeat for what we're going to do. We're going to have a meeting once a month where we review. Here's the don'ts, here's the do's, here's how you know you're in a gray area, here's how we make decisions about it. Show and tell and science fair projects and test and validate first.
Yep.
Show us how this works before you let it go roughshod and send out 10,000 emails. Like these are all just common like agile methodologies, right? This is just normal approach to implementing a new and developing technology that is uncertain for all of us is more communication and more group discussion and mostly like show and tell. But for most organizations that we've seen, like, yeah, we don't know what we don't know.
It's like that
And
email I
yeah.
got the other day that said, "Dear first name." And then I got a follow-up email that said, "We were just checking to see if you were paying attention. We know what your first name is." And I was like, "Do you? Or was that a mistake?"
Yeah, and if we can't even do a mass email right without making mistakes, then we're definitely gonna have mistakes with AI.
Yeah.
Like, but so yeah. Anyway, Liz, thank you so much. This is great. Like any like if you could summarize in like the one thing that the average like HR person could do when it comes to culture in this, like what's your like, hey, this is where I'd start.
I'd start with talking to people. I think I go back to something I said earlier. People want to be seen, they want to be heard, and they want to feel valued. And so any culture initiative that happens in HR in a vacuum, it's not a great initiative. So talk to folks, get people involved, get people engaged, help create that sense of community. And I think that's where all this work starts. And thanks
And
for
what does that look like? Let me dig into that a little bit. Talking to people like is because like so on the product side, when we say we need to talk to our customers, and I go, hey, product managers, you should talk to the customers, they usually like start reaching out and setting appointments to have a deliberate actual conversation. And when I say talk to customers, I mean I show up at National SHRM and I hang out at the bar or I hang out at the snack area where they put out food and I just have random casual conversations, not deliberate, structured, hey, I'm going to interview 20 employees. So how do you see that translate into HR?
I think it's both, actually. I gave you the example of that hospitality organization that I was chatting with yesterday, and we were talking just exactly about that. One tactic is to do some stay interviews and to talk to folks about why are you here? What do you love? How do we create more of it? They're also doing an employee engagement survey, like a quick pulse check thing. That's a great way of reaching folks. They're also setting up time for HR just to be available because, again, hospitality, people are all in a space, so they're putting a booth out. Pop by whenever. It's like an open house. We just want to hear what
Mhm.
your thoughts are. So I think having a multi-pronged approach is just a way to connect with folks. But what was fascinating about that particular group is they said, we've done a lot of this. We've talked to people. And I said, great. Well, when you got all the information, did you share it back? And they went, no, we never did that. And that's the interesting part, right? So they were talking to folks, but they weren't sharing any of it back. So why would I ever take your survey again? Why would I
Mhm.
stop by your HR booth and have a conversation with you if I don't know where that information went, right? And so we were talking about they have a lack of trust that they perceive. And so we were talking about, trust is built on, yeah, you got to talk to people, but then you have to share the information back. And then you have to work with those people to co-create a solution. And they got to talk to those people again and say, here's what we actually did, here's what we implemented. And it continues round and round. And so, I think as a final thought, talk to people, but then also try to implement some of it.
Yeah, 100%. And even if it's not implemented, that doesn't mean you go dark.
No, you say that was a great idea. We couldn't implement it for the following reasons, but maybe you were able to do something different or smaller. Or you say, that's something great. We're going to think about that for Q3 or Q4. We don't have the resources for it right now. Just that level of transparency is huge.
Yeah, I think that one, the talk to people number one and the following up, even if you don't have a great answer.
Yeah,
Like ghosting somebody is a withdrawal from the bank account.
100%. Yep.
100%. Well, thank you, Liz. This was awesome. Enjoyed talking to you. And
Yeah.
we'll talk to you later. There will be in the YouTube channel information. There's links to Liz on LinkedIn, her website, all that type of stuff. So check down in the description. You'll be able to get access to her. What a conversation with Dr. Liz Scott. If you're taking notes, here are the 3 big takeaways I want you to walk away with. First, culture isn't about proximity, it's about social capital. Trust, reciprocity, and emotional support matter way more than whether someone's sitting in the cube next to you. Second, if you want to build real culture, you've got to talk to your people. But here's the key part everyone misses. You have to close the loop. Share what you learned, show what you implemented, and be transparent about what you can't do right now. And third, AI isn't going to replace human connection, but leaders who figure out how to use it as a tool to amplify culture and collaboration, they're going to have a massive advantage. Dr. Liz Scott, thank you for sharing your expertise and those practical frameworks. Everyone, you can connect with Liz on LinkedIn. All her info is in the show notes below. And hey, if this episode resonated with you, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment about your biggest culture challenge in hybrid work. I read every single one, and your questions often spark ideas for future episodes. The future of work isn't just about the technology we use, it's about how we connect, lead, and create belonging in an increasingly distributed world. Until next time, keep building that culture, one conversation at a time.